Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another week of More Than a Statistic. I'm your host, Justin Griffin, and this is my youngest son, Tyndall. I'm a little late recording this show because we had the Chris Newsom Memorial Tournament was today, and we ended up making a run all the way to the championship game. We fell a little short in it, but we still come in second place. You want to show him your ring? He's pretty happy about that. They like rings. You got anything you want to say? No? Okay, why don't you go get bathed up, okay, before we get in trouble. Okay, so tonight's episode is on paths, and I come up with this idea while I was working. The job site that I'm at, it requires us to shuttle in from a designated parking lot. But it's right next door to the job site, but there's some woods in between. And after the first day or two, I learned about the path. I learned that there was a path that if you didn't want to wait in line to get in a car and drive over, we could also walk over. So I started taking the path. It's pretty good, it's quick, little, easy, nothing too crazy. I plan on showing y'all and kind of so you can kind of see the ideas and see what I see. That way you kind of get what I get from it. But I was there for a couple weeks before I learned that there was a second path, and I took it. Somebody showed it to me, and I took it with them. And the first time I took it, the first path, it only has one little creek that we have to cross, and we got a piece of wood over it, so it's really easy to get across. The other path, it ended up having 3 splits upstream, so you had to jump 3 separate streams to remain on the path, and it seemed a little bit more difficult to navigate, and so naturally I went back to the first path that I'd been showed, the one that was pretty easy. But as time went on and the days went on and the rain came and more people started coming on to this job, more people started taking that path, so that path started wearing out a lot faster. It had become a big muddy mess in places, and we did our best to throw something in there to help us get over the mud or to make sure we didn't slip when we was going across the water. But it wore out pretty bad, and that's where this started to kind of stew in my head, was because I noticed the conditions of the path were changing. And then I started thinking about that other path, and I ended up giving that path another shot, and I started walking down it. And when I got to the part that had the 3 splits, I paused for a second and I looked, and just if you curved down to the right just a hair, you could barely see where people had been doing it, but you would only have to go across the one creek, and then we'd continue on walking. And I should say that this path it's a little bit harder to see because not as many people's walking on it. There's still leaves all over the place. You'll see a eventual footprint where they've slipped in the mud, but this trail's a whole lot harder to see, and it's a lot of people don't use it because all they know about is the 3 creeks. They think that that's the harder route to take, so they choose to either shuttle over or they choose the easy path. But I've started taking this path more and more, and when I got to that point, like I said, I realized that if I just go down to the right a little bit, the creek is super small and there's a perfect little landing to where you can step into the creek dry and make it across. And the conditions are way better. It's not nearly as muddy. There's a lot of obstructions that if you fall off of this little path, you can run into sticks, there's rocks, there's no telling what else is under the leaves. But it started resonating with me, and I started calculating this path into what my own walk and my own life look like. If you've ever been to church, you know that the Bible is full of stories about paths, and it talks about what we need to do in these paths. I've got a couple of different scriptures that I looked up that discuss paths, and I figured I'd read over them and we kind of see what we got from it. I don't really plan to keep y'all 30 minutes, an hour. I'm just going to try to just kind of say my piece. We'll see how it goes. I just ask God to be with us. On my first one, I chose Proverbs 3:5, and it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek His will in all you do, and He will show you which path to take." Okay, That's pretty self-explanatory. Is that that's what we need to do. We don't need to try to rely on ourselves as much as we tend to think that we can. We're not as big of a difference maker as we would like to believe that we are in situations. So this is saying, instead of trusting you, trust God. And you got to do it with your whole heart. I heard it said that God's not going to heal who you pretend to be. And that stuck with me because I've been that guy before, that I was trying to fake it till I make it. And in this walk, man, one thing I can say is there's not faking it. Not, you can fake it to the people around you, and if you go to church, your congregation, you might have them fooled. But when we're dealing with who we're dealing with, there's no fooling these people. God made us. He created us. He knows our ways. So, if you're not going to be honest with anybody else, we have to learn how to be honest with God, and we got to learn how to trust in Him. So it continues on. It says, do not depend on your own understanding. And that's me. Is because normally when the answer comes around, I'd sit back and I'd think, you know what, I never even thought of it like that. And that's because I'm not as smart as I would like to believe that I am. And it says, seek His will in all that you do, and He will show you which path to take. This is something that I've been practicing, and I don't do it perfectly, but I try to take, I try to not go too many hours without thinking about Jesus and doing a quick little head prayer, or, when I'm struggling with something, if work's being difficult, the task is being difficult, I'll be like, come on, Jesus, I'm doing this for you, help me with it. And that's helping me with, the anger and the frustrations. Like I don't get as riled up as I used to, and that's just a part of this walk. And what's cool about it is the longer that you take this walk, and that's why I highly recommend that you go to church, because, I can't speak for everybody, but I know for myself, most of my life, I've really sucked at reading the Bible. And still to this day, I'm not the best at it. And I encourage y'all to go to church, because you're going to go there and at least you're going to hear from someone that does read their Bible. And what that does is when you start hearing it, you begin to understand it. And then after you understand it, you're going to dive in, because you're going to believe it, because this is real. And I know, like I said, we're not too good at reading the Bible, so I feel like going to church really helps jumpstart the rest of the process in the walks, because it really helped me. I can at least say that. We'll move on to the next one, and that's in Proverbs 4:18. I'm using my wife's Bible, and it's very small. 4:18, and it says, the way of the righteous is like the first gleam of dawn, which shines ever brighter until the full light of day. But the way of the wicked is like total darkness. They have no idea what they are stumbling over. My child, pay attention to what I say. Listen carefully to my words. Don't lose sight of them. Let them penetrate you deep in your heart, for they bring life to those who find them and healing to their whole body. Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. And in the ESV that had path instead of the course. So, so what he's saying is, I want to explain it. First, a righteous person is just someone who tries to live like Jesus. They try to live right. They try to treat people fairly. And, it's not something that they're going to be perfect at, but it's just we're consistently trying to be more like Jesus. We're consistently trying to love more like Jesus. That's what the path of righteousness kind of looks like, at least to me. Okay, and it says, the first gleam of dawn, which shines brighter until the full light of day. And that's kind of what I was saying was with the getting into church. It's kind of dark because, you're in that stage of thinking that I need to fix myself before I can get up to this speed to where I can openly worship. That's how I felt. I felt, I'd done all this stuff. I'd run for so long. I hadn't been coming to church long enough yet to take that next step. And that's That's a huge misconception that my brother helped me understand, you know, because as soon as we repent for it, it's done, and it's like it never existed. And I've always dwelled. I've always been a dweller. I want to hold on. I let things go, but I hold on to them afterwards. So it's telling you here, you know, the longer we go, the more that we're going to see, because we're going to have more light. We're going to understand more. More is going to make sense. We're going to be able to piece together more. And then it says, but the way of the wicked is total darkness. They have no idea what they are stumbling over. That's pretty self-explanatory. And, you know, guilty. I've been there. Been there. Why is this happening? Sound familiar? It says, my children, pay attention to what I say. Listen carefully to my words and do not lose sight of them. Let them penetrate deep in your heart, for they bring life to those who find them and healing to their whole body. So what this is doing here is that I'm taking something that really hindered my life, something that I battled, something that I got over, thankfully. I'm grateful for that. And now I'm taking my mess and I'm going back and I'm trying to help pull out the others. And that's a side effect of doing that. Following Jesus is there's all these side effects. Is, you know, he's going to take your mess and he's going to completely reconfigure that, and he's going to use it for his glory, because he uses all things through his glory. I'm going to move on to number 3 now. And that is Psalm 16:11. And it says, you will show me the way of life, granting me the joy of your presence and the pleasures of living with you forever. You will show me the way of life, granting me the joy of your presence and the pleasures of living with you forever. So kind of like what I was talking about, you know, when I got to that part of the path that you couldn't really see too good, and it split into 3. At first, I didn't know what to do. You know, I crossed all 3. And I turned around and I went back to the old path, because my foot got muddy on the second jump crossing that second creek. And, you know, that was all it took for me to go right back to that first comfortable path for a long time. When you begin to follow him, now you're going to get attacked. I'm not going to say your life's going to get easier, because you're taking a very real step here. You know, when you begin to live for Jesus, the enemy is going to attack you. Granting me the joy of your presence and the pleasures of living with you forever. That outweighs it all, because we're carrying him in our hearts. You know that anything we go up against, we can come across the top of it, because he lives inside of us if you've asked him there. And then I got Psalms 119, 105. It says, your word is a lamp to guide my feet and a light for my path. And that's this. And that's as we go to church, we go to Bible studies, we read for ourselves, we start to learn all this stuff. Every bit of it. You start to slowly just, this sinks in, this sinks in. Oh yeah, I remember that. And it says, your word is like a guide to my feet. There's so much that I've gone through in my life that someone has went through in this book already. If I'd have done my part, and I'd have read like I should, and I would study like I should, I could have saved myself a lot of hurt, a lot of desperation, a lot of heartache. This has all the answers to almost anything you're encountering. There's a story in here, or there's scriptures in here that's going to relate, and it's going to make sense, and it's going to tell you what to do. I highly advise that if you're struggling in any way, give it to Jesus. You know, I'm not a preacher, and I know This isn't the best show. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a Sunday school teacher. I'm just me. But I'm here, and I love you guys. And I just hope that you kind of understand, that life's full of paths. As mankind, we kind of tend to stay on that comfortable one, but what I learned through taking that other path is that once you've been down that path a few times, you know where all the hazards lie, because he gives you discernment to identify it. That gives you the opportunity to walk around, we get to avoid a lot of it because we know the signs of when it's coming. We've been here, we've done that, we've dealt with it, and we've dealt with it properly. They said your problem turns out is all determined by where you take your problem to. And that's what I want to end the show on is, what do we take our problems to? And are we exhausted of that yet? If it's not to him, are we tired? Because the same book, it says that he'll give us rest. I love you guys. I ain't really got much more tonight. I'm looking forward, I got a couple of people that I'm going to try to get lined up, get on here. Got some good stories coming up. We're still looking forward to August doing the overdose awareness. And we love you guys. We mean it. See you next week.